Hello to all the panelists also.
Hello, hello. Good
Hello.
evening, everyone. Okay, we are live now. My name is Joyashree Dey, and I am an English literature scholar. I welcome you to the Stories of Working Women series that will explore the role of working women in history in shaping cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS Review June 2025 in collaboration with the Center for Asia Pacific Initiative, University of Victoria. We are also calling for the submission of essay, poem and short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. So this evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists Noah Berlatsky, Dr. Rima Namhata, and Dr. Piyush Roy, who will shortly share their views and insight with us. The topic for today's discussion is laughter and liberation, women's humor and activism for social change, under the sub-theme Women Warriors, Activists and Reformers. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our speakers one by one. Our first speaker for the session is Noah Bursky. Noah Bursky is a freelance writer and critic based in Chicago. He is the author of Wonder Woman, Bondage and Feminism in Marston Peter Comics and the poetry collection Not Akmat Over. We are delighted to have you on the panel, sir. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to our next speaker, we have with us Dr. Rima Namhata. Dr. Rima Namhata serves as an assistant professor in School of Liberal Arts at Alliance University, Bangalore. She completed her PhD for IIT Kharagpur. Her primary areas of instruction encompasses business communication, soft skills, design thinking, sustainability practices, and inclusivity of language. Her research areas include Indian campus fiction, discourse analysis, pedagogical approaches to soft skill, and design thinking besides. She is a certified aviation English trainer by Ministry of Civil Aviation, Government of India. We are delighted to have you, ma'am, on the panel this evening. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining with us.
Thank you.
And last but not the least, our third panelist we have with us, Dr. Piyush Roy. Dr. Piyush Roy is an Indian National Film Award winning critic, columnist, and an international author, curator, poet, filmmaker, and professor in film, media, and criticism studies. He brings over 3 decades of combined work experience in media, publishing, education, and filmmaking. Former editor of popular film magazines such as Stardust and Film Weekly Star Week. He has worked at senior reporting position in Hindustan Times, The Indian Express, and Society magazine. In the filmmaking world, his debut documentary feature Pleasure, Prejudice, and Pride, an Indian way of filmmaking, has been the focus of multiple seminar screening tours across universities in UK and India. His latest documentary, The Monarch of the Blue Mountain 2023, explores the timeless and universal appeals of Sri Jagannath culture and consciousness. Sir, we are very delighted to have you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. Now, I will ask each panelist to share his insight with us. First, we will go to Noah, sir. Sir, can you please share your insight on the topic that is laughter and liberation?
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm here because I wrote this book about Wonder Woman, and which the original Wonder Woman comics were written by William Marston and Harry Peter in the 40s, and yeah, I mean, they're these kind of silly, weird stories for young people, which are also like really kind of adventurous in terms of ideas about liberation and equality and queerness. And yeah, so that's, I mean, I think that those comics kind of show that you can be sort of accessible and also kind of really experimental and weird in kind of approaching feminism and trying to teach people about equality and empowerment. So
Sorry, my mic is muted. Thank you so much, sir. Rima, can you share your insight on the topic which you think?
Yeah, I would be perhaps a bit detailed than Noah. Um,
Sure, sure.
when I was invited for this talk, I just started visiting some of the links and all, and I picked these lines by Michael Nagler and Karen Reed from the Open Democracy website, which shows that humor is a time-honored strategy, and we as teachers definitely take out the strategic humor to class. In the repertoire of nonviolence, well, we can replace it with social issues, but we must learn to use it properly. The idea is to poke fun at the problem and not the person. It's the attitude and not the person. So, aside from its effects on opponents, humor is also a great way to relieve tensions in activists themselves. We have also seen in our home situations. What's the best way to deal a situation but a humor? It can turn for the betterment. Mahatma Gandhi once said that had it not been for his sense of humor, he would have gone mad long ago in the face of disharmony, hatred, and what history has witnessed. Humor could be very effective in establishing a human connection between parties in conflict, in social disparities, and can diffuse conflict trauma to a lot extent, in a way, and it's however, when the heat is really on, to remember humor is also not always easy. So those who are scripting it, those who know to use their wit and presence of mind in a much more time bound way, I would say, that takes care of the situation. But like any strategy, it has to be appropriately applied. I think that's the rule of the thumb. And uh, the idea again is not to expose the folly of any person, but doing without ridiculing the person or the group. But humor, it's definitely not humiliating somewhere. It's somewhere a very fine line that we need to maintain that balance, or as our activists be doing. So the idea is not against the well-being of the person or people. We are opposing, no. And yes, sometimes we laugh at ourselves, our vulnerabilities, our personal stories, our personal anecdotes, our personal jokes, also to make relief tensions, to send a strong social message. Those who can understand that, they will take it well. And it's always helpful to take not oneself too seriously, I believe, but self-directed humor has to be aimed with the same precaution, to laugh at something and not that what we have done or said, not who we are. So the key is again to poke fun at the behavior, attitude that is causing the problems, and not the person per se. In fact, when humor used in the right spirit, for me, it's only the class strategies I know. It always puts quarrels, conflicts, diffuses tension, brings awareness. However, realization is something very internal, which I believe. And it takes care of the most grimmest of situations. And it can take care, I believe, in the long run, many of these factors. Cinema, like Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all the social media platforms that we are having, all the new media platforms that we are having in 1890s and 1900s, was a very powerful terrain for a social protest and for cultural experimentation, where women's bodies were ideal for their ends because they were believed to be physically malleable. To give an example, where corsets women were expected to wear in the early 1900s, that contorted their body to nothing but hourglasses. So the phenomena stayed over there. It's just that the era or the century has changed. Well, those same, so the physically malleable part still remains without the external manipulation, I believe. So issues have changed from time. Certain things have remained constant, be it from voting rights to abortion rights to Me Too movements. Laughter indeed has become a powerful weapon. Even in the recent spite of the very, 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 very painful event that happened in with the Abhaya incident, we are all aware of. Some level of social changes were also experimented through a lot of memes and humors, not to again to poke to at anyone, but to confront the problem. So laughter and liberations for social change in the Indian context, where humor and activism often intersect. I would say passive activism, I think I would put it in that way. And to question social change, taboos, conditionings, and the like. We have been conditioned in a way. So it becomes a very powerful tool for liberation for the performers, for the activists, where sometimes it could be navigating a patriarchal society that the marginalizes voices, bodies, body shaming, even the taboos associated with remaining single or in a relationship. We know the list is endless. So we can think of them. And humor as a tool for social critique, we have seen even the situational comedies, even the rom-coms, which have also become a great tool for it has challenged social norms, particularly that has oppressed women, such as gender defined roles, cleaning, washing, cooking, feeding, and the like. And this humor resonates with audience at large in similar questions, but humor questions the orthodox defined roles. We can see even in the satirical writings of Twinkle Khanna, and even in one of her famous situation comedies of Sarabhai versus Sarabhai, with which we have grown with. We have seen those situations, right? A very light-hearted genre of theater and television, yet we have enjoyed growing up with them, not really knowing, maybe at a later point of time when we introspected, we realized, okay, there are some realities, biting realities, perhaps taken in humor. It was well taken, well digested, bite-sized. So humor could be a powerful tool of empowerment as well as identity for many performers or activists, we may call them alternatively. Indian female comedians, writers, activists have turned humor into an empowering force. Especially in the urban spaces, in the cosmopolitan spaces, in the cafes, we have seen such dedicated spaces being there where this performance there, and negotiating the space between the tradition, modernity, and we have seen our Sas Bahu episodes, or even staying single, arranged marriages, love marriages, trying to challenge the norms of conformity. So it's again endless. True, there is rise of women's comedy in India. That has been an important part of this cultural shift, from the same biting sarcasm, but in a much more sugar-coated way, in a much more humor-coated way, with a lot of wit, a lot of people who can identify the sarcasm. So in the likes of Zakir Khan, Sumukhi Suresh, and where they have been tackling important topics of body shaming. I think many of us have grown up with that, to be very honest, sexual freedom or even gender-based discrimination. There are a lot of comedy festivals, Comic-Con, this kind of platform spaces, which YouTube, social medias have given to women, to this kind of space to reach out to a larger, a wider audience. The campaigns and movements, there has been offshoot of campaigns and movements we have seen, from Me Too to whatnot, right? We have seen those kind of campaigns. We have seen it in popular culture, Bollywood television. We are talking about, right, cinema. So from 1890s and onwards to the present 2024s, and even the earlier. So stand-up comics or digital content creators have created a space to talk about social issues with a lot of humor, making it accessible to the masses. And the Instagram, the YouTube, the TikTok videos, they have providing thought-provoking content that encourages resistance to cultural norms, patriarchy, taboos associated with, I think, most obvious of women's existence, and yet ridiculing them. So those have been the weapons of. Humor has also been a wonderful coping mechanism, I believe, for many, where the society demands conformity. However, laughter has helped to alleviate the emotional burden of living under the weight of systemic oppression. So that is where I have felt. And what I've loved about this present generation of comedy is that these content creators are using skits, very day-to-day, relatable, similar situations happening at our homes, to create awareness about, yes, sexual harassment that we face in our public transports to our offices. We have seen this, even of course, some of the and the episodes of All India Bakchod, we have the viral fever of TVF. So they have been addressing very periodically, very systematically, the satire, the political critic, and they have been powerful commentaries on social issues. also addressing the Me Too movement. I just remembered one. AIB's sketch Me Too with Tanmay Bhatt poked fun at the hypocrisy of men who became very sensitive and cautious in the workplace after the movement had gained attention. We also remember how Tanushri Dutt from Bollywood had first, we learned about it, and there were a lot of faces, names which came in the forefront. So some comedic sketches turned the lens on men's discomfort after these kind of Me Too movements, and they highlighted how men were grappling with ideas of boundaries, not knowing when a joke or compliment would be crossing the lines. So we don't know how and when societal eruptions can emerge through humor, for good, definitely, and for the betterment, of course. Humor has also been a vehicle for education and awareness, I believe, which has been both entertaining as well as engaging, basically to engage large audiences and without breaking the seriousness, to break the seriousness trap, not making it too serious. So, talking a bit about the Indian female comedians and the tools for social, I mean, they have mostly, I think, they have taken the spaces of YouTube, Instagram, the reels, the stand-up comedy shows, spaces like Comic Stan, where the comedians have used humor just not for entertainment, but to initiate important conversations, thought processes around social justice, making their work an essential tool for activism. Again, activism is too strong a word. Maybe it could be passive activism as well. But yes, maybe fun, yet there is an underlying, a very strong undercurrent of a social message, which the takers, the onlookers, or the audience would definitely take it if they are responsible on their own and have the sense of realization. So the first theme that while I was, viewing some of these, the stand-up comedies, like they challenge the gender stereotypes. People like comedians like Neeti Palta or Sumukhi Suresh, and breaking taboos around mental health, body images, social expectations, even the menstrual cycles which women experience and all regarding their physical appearance, mental well-being, social expectations. So they're using the comedy to break these taboos and create space for honest conversations about mental health, not spoken about body images, which the idea of respecting it no matter what. And talking about breaking taboos about mental health, some prominent names being Vidya Iyer, famously known as Vidya V, or Zainab Patel or Surbhi Bora, who addresses the areas of beauty, marriage, motherhood, and by laughing at these social expectations, she challenges not only but empowers women to embrace their individuality. And sometimes, with body image, the absurdity regarding the obsession with the ideal body type, we have heard lots about it in Indian society, and which reflects her own experiences of body shaming and self-esteem. I'm talking of Vidya V, actually. And even in Oprah Winfrey shows, there's also an intended pun, one of the strategies also of humor strategies, where people used to, kind of connect with the audience at large. So a bit on Twinkle Khanna's, regular columns. So the Legend of Lakshmi Prasad, her debut book, critiqued patriarchy and gender norms and redefining womanhood, where she discusses the pressures of being a wife and mother, also while making sharp observations about, the conformed roles, relationships, and the absurdities which even women face today, challenging the social stereotypes, the family marriage, body image, perceptions of beauty, class, and consumerism, even the consumer culture prevalent in modern India that we call the affluent urbanites. There's this typical consumer culture prevalent, and Twinkle Khanna has very meaningfully critiqued it. So, and also how the Bollywood culture has parodied celebrities and the sense of being cultural icons. So these are some of her prominent work, especially Mrs. Funny Bones, when I read and all for this particular. So it talks of the expectations placed on women without sacrificing the wit and humor that makes the columns readable, engaging, or the shows very relatable, palpable, yet creating a sense of social awareness as well as realization, which of course has to come from within. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and it's very informative. And I completely agree with you. Humor is a type of coping mechanism, but sometimes the stand-up comedians break this line. Like recently, that controversy between Samarana and Kusha Kapila, where he like rudely comments on her private life and divorce. So yeah, like there should be maintain a fine line.
A fine line needs to be tread, that is for sure. Yeah, sure.
Sir, what's your take on this, Piyush sir?
Thank you, Joyashree, and both were very insightful presentations. So, and thank you for having me here. The invitation, and it's a fabulous initiative. Would like to congratulate Tell Me Your Story and Coral for that. So I will follow the brief that you gave me. So since I come from a Indian cinema and a Natya Shastra background, the melodramatic form, I thought I would focus more, and I think it will be a good way to go back from where Rima left us. So you brought us to the present world. I'm just going to the ancient world, and then I will be looking at the evolution of the comedian or the female comic and the challenges that the genre has faced and how people have evolved and why we as a nation still have to get into the habit of laughing at ourselves more. We are getting there now, but it's been a long journey. Now, to start with, the Natya Shastra, the Sanskrit drama, which is like kind of the bedrock guide motif, which has been for all the performances and representations in the various art forms from art, painting, sculpture, drama, theater to by default cinema. It talks about nine rasas, the Navarasas, where hasya or comedy is a very important rasa. Now, unlike the Aristotelian view where fear and pathos are prioritized as the dominant human emotions among the others, Natya Shastra, or actually Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra, he doesn't categorize them that that the tragedy is above a comedy kind of a thing. All the rasas are equally important in life, and the good piece of work should be able to evoke these rasas in you, and then culminate at leaving you with tranquility or shantaras. So the masala film format, if we look at this all the great films, right from Mother India to Pushpa, Sholay, and all, they have kind of done this. I mean, there is, see, it's perhaps only in the Indian cinema where you will have in a horror movie a love story backdrop, there will be a ghost singing, there will be comic elements. So this whole mixing comes from the Natya Shastra traditions. Now, to the early classical writers, mostly like from the time of Valmiki to Kalidas, Vyasa, and all the great works, say Ramayana, and if you look at the works of Kalidas, you will have the heroines predominantly coming from a certain backdrop. They were either from the heaven, gods, goddesses, apsaras, or they were royalty. You rarely see people, the other classes in classical drama. And also because Sanskrit was the mode of conversation, and so I think this worked well there. In that space, I think the first rebellion comes with Mrichakatikam of Sudraka, where the madam of the house, Vasant Sena, is the one who holds the fort. And along with the first time in Sanskrit or in classical Indian literature, you encounter women who are not just ideal versions of certain expectations and roles, but they are having a lot of fun. Now from there, if we come and then that space is gradually taken over when the stories are written about a Chitralekha or a Vasanta Sena or an Amrapali. I think women having more layers to them, and in the layers comedy coming in happens when these characters become the heroines vis-a-vis Sita, Savitri, Draupadi, and all, who were the heroines of the earlier phases of writing. So now that's one stage. Now what? Now I'll straight away jump to what happened when cinema came in and Dadasaheb Phalke's Raja Harishchandra, and as we all know, the first film didn't have female actors to act in it. So male actors actually performed the female roles. But the Phalke very much followed the Natashastra model, and where it has this template of the Nayak and the Naika, the ideal hero and the ideal heroine, especially in the space of the Shringar Rasa, and there is a beautiful concept of the Ashtanaikas, and these have been the Ashtanaika has actually this concept influenced the representation of women, even if you see in the Pahadi or in the Mughal era paintings and all. These Ashtanaikas are women with lot of agency. They are and they are all in context of romantic space. So they're either angry or they're betrayed or they're taking revenge, and this is or dressing up for the occasion to meet the lover, and then the Nayaks are there. So the Ashtanayak, Nayika, and then this whole Sringaras was also being considered as the Rasaraj. So majority of the narratives used to be in that space. That legacy continues with romance being one of the most dominant genres in cinema even today. So, but when cinema happened, like post 1913, in the feature film format, silent era, for the initial 10 years, 95% of the narratives were either influenced by the epics, the Puranas, or the classical plays, the template set by Dadasaheb Phalke. But towards the end of the 1920s or mid 1920s, when we had the Anglo-Indian actresses first coming into cinema, because the mainstream Indian female actress still wasn't coming, and then when the singing era comes in, so we have the performers from the singing tradition coming in. So we have the Muslim ladies coming in at that time from that Gharana tradition of singing, which happens in the 1930s in the talkie era. But before that, in the 20th era, so we had Sulochana was considered the first female superstar of Indian cinema. Ruby Mayers actually. Now she has a movie called Wild Cat of Bombay in 1927, where she does 8 roles, and ranging from that of a gardener, a policeman, a street urchin, a Hyderabadi gentleman, to a European blonde and a banana seller. Now, this is perhaps, I think, the first recorded instance of comedy being done by a female actor in multiple roles. So, Sulochana or Ruby Mayers. So, and then, of course, the 1930s with the singing coming in, comedy takes a slight backseat because other genres come in, because singing allows you to explore more tragedy and those spaces. So you have the whole Achut Kanya and the Devika Rani genre of films from Bombay talkies, and on the other end you have Hunter Wali and the whole Nadia series. I think we were one of the first film industries to actually have really female superstars. If you look at the posters of 1930s, you will have a big Devika Rani somewhere and Ashok Kumar, a tiny dot on the poster. What happens later in the angry young man phase, when the women actors are pushed to the background and you have the big male heroes on the and same thing with Fearless Nadia. So then, so when from the silent, also because see, silent era again, looking at the whole influence legacy of Charlie Chaplin, which is very visual, which is very dramatic, which is very performative. Comedy has a lot more chance to be done. But when singing comes in, and you bring in all the emotions and you bring in all the drama, somewhere the comic is also there because of the Navarasa requirement, but it becomes a minor element. And so, as cinema matures, so we have the hero, the heroine, the villain, but something very distinct to Indian cinema is the comic actor and the comedian and the comedian, the female comic. So you have Johnny Walker and Tuntun, you have Mahmood and Shobha Khote, you have Rajendranath and Shashikala. So this is something again very distinct. And these were, I mean, you will be amazed to know, Tuntun actually started as a great, he was a playback singer. And 1947, one of the biggest chart busters, Afsana Likh Rahi Hu, was by Tuntun. And by the way, her real name was Uma Devi. She was not Tuntun at that time. And then I think she sings in S.S. Vasan's Chandralekha, the epic, which was like Tamil movie remade into Hindi, and she becomes this big singing sensation. But there is a studio contract issue with her producers, and then Lata Mangeshkar emerges, 49 with Barsat, and the old genre of singing takes a backseat. So Tuntun, I mean Uma Devi, Suraya, Noor Jahan, they all take a backseat. This new form of singing comes in. That's when Nausha tells her, like, having directed her as her music director, that you have a great comic sense and comic timing. Why don't you act into movies? And then she comes with Arpar and the old Guru Dutt movies. And then Tuntun goes on to act her last movie. So she starts with in the 1950s, and her last movie is in 1989, 1989, 90, Shehzade and Kasam Paida Karne, something like that. So, so she is like, you can call the female equivalent of a Helen. So there were heroines. You had, but then there was only Helen from the 50s right till the 80s in that space of the vamp or the other woman or whatever you want to call. Similarly, Tuntun was a star in her own right. Scenes were written of her and Johnny Walker sometimes, and that's what audiences used to go and see. In many of, Dilip Kumar and Tuntun had a great friendship, and Dilip Kumar's movies had one phase, Tragedy King. So he was doing also. It was necessary for these actors to come in and give the comic relief. So the comedian was a very big box office draw, and this you could see from the fact that they had their own songs. You have Rajendra Nath and Shashikala singing their songs. Mehmood and Shobha Kote then comes in the again, and she's another interesting story. She comes from an athletics background and she goes on to become a comedian, a female comic, as you can say. So Tuntun and then Shobha Kote again, she starts again in the 1950s, and her last film was as recent as 2022, which was Double XL. So look at the careers of. But yes, there was a certain, but still, I think when we come towards the end of 70s or 80s is the first time when you actually see heroines also doing comic roles, in the sense that, I mean, you had the occasional Sita or Gita, you had a Basanti and Sholay and Hema Malini doing that. But a heroine doing a predominantly comic role and getting acclaim for that was Rekha with Khoobsurat. This is for the first time that the heroine is actually playing a comic character and is getting a Filmfare Best Actress award for that. I was just looking at, and I think, Rima, you talked about Vidya Balan and others. In the 69 to 70 years of the Filmfare Best Actress awards, only I think 3 times there have been purely comic roles have won the Best Actress. So this was one with Khoobsurat, then happens with Hum Hai Rahi Pyar Ke. And that year it was a big controversy. Juhi Chawla getting a Best Actress for Hum Hai Rahi Pyar Ke over Dimple Kapadia's Rudali and Meenakshi Sheshadri's Damini brought a huge debate. I mean, so the one side said the comedy is as tough as doing tragedy, so it shouldn't be looked down upon. And that was the huge debate, because here you had a Rudali and a Damini, and here you had doing, and again Juhi Chawla, another actress with fantastic comic timing. Now we had great actresses with comic timing. So Nutan in the 50s, she had fabulous comic timing. Asha Parekh had great comic timing. Rekha, of course, was like brilliant, and in movies after movies. Then, of course, we had the whole 70s middle of the road cinema phase where they were predominantly comedies, but like a Chupke Chupke. You can't call it a comic film. It was a comedy, but there were no comedians in it. So then I think the last major role in that space to get was, of course, Kangana Ranaut in Queen. So this, I would say, is kind of been, and I will say the evolution of the role and the respect of the role will only come when more and more actors doing lead actors doing lead parts will bring comic to the fore. I think there is a fantastic job being done by stand-up comedians and others who have reclaimed the Hasyaras for what it is, and the ultimate of Hasyaras is satire. I think we need more movies like Jane Bhi Do Yaro. That's a benchmark. I mean, that's where our cinema should aspire to go in the comic space. It starts, of course, if you again look at Tuntun and Shobha Kote, they also do with which can be problematic now. They were laughed at because they were a bit plump. Those were issues. They could be, but they came out of that stereotyping to become their own space. The Tuntun became her own attraction. I mean, even if she comes for a brief sequence in Amar Akbar Anthony, so you have the whole galaxy of Amitabh and Vinod Khanna and Rishi Kapoor and Neetu Singh, Shabana Azmi and all. And when Tuntun comes and takes her own song, and this with actors who are half her age. So these characters were there. I think because of an orientation, subconscious orientation towards accepting comedy as equally important as every other genre. We have had comic stars, and now I think over the time, but that is also, I think, we see the maturing of cinema, because when you go from black and white to gray, you say the characterization has improved. Similarly, heroes and heroine taking up comic roles, and you have a lot of examples in the among the male space. Perhaps I think it starts with, I mean, look at Amitabh Bachchan. He does a Diwar, he does a Janji, he does a Saath Hindustani, but his first Filmfare Best Actor award comes for Amar Akbar Anthony, which is a huge endorsement of the fact that comedy is no less. We don't say that. See, like we always say, Shakespearean tragedy is over a Shakespeare. Like a Hamlet is up there and Merchant of Venice is somewhere there. In the Natya Shastra mode, it's not like that. They all are in that same bracket. All the 9 rasas are equal because they are all make living important. And then, of course, I think there is a great space happening in films with lot of women filmmakers making films. They are bringing dignity to that space in terms of the conversations. A lot of mature conversations are taking the humorous beat in a Lipstick Under My Burqa or Angry Indian Goddess, all those films. I think it's a great space. I think I on that positive note, let me pause. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful observation. And yes, I agree with you that without a bit of comedy or hasyaras, any story would be very dull. Except film also, there are many series like Friends. The comic characters Rachel, Phoebe, and Monica, they are also very famous as female comic characters. So I guess we are progressing towards that from male comic to female comic characters. Okay. On that note, we will now move on to our question answer segment. My first question to Noah sir. Sir, Catwoman and Harley Quinn have often been portrayed as both a villain and an anti heroine, using wit, seduction, and humor as tools of empowerment to navigate their roles in male dominated worlds. How do you think their characters challenge traditional narrative of women in comics, and how might their humor intersect with feminist activism?
Yeah. So I think anytime you have these kind of corporate characters who have kind of lots of different creators working on them and sort of lots of iterations over the years, I mean, there isn't really one answer. It's kind of depends on what people do with them. Particularly somebody like Catwoman or Harlequin. I mean, sometimes they're kind of presented as sort of subversive or maybe try to have some. I mean, sometimes they're not even really especially funny. I mean, it kind of depends on what the creator does with them. I think one kind of interesting way to think about that is this. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this filmmaker named Vera Drew, who's trans, she did a film this year called The People's Joker. I guess it was released. I guess she started showing it at festivals a couple years ago, but it just came to streaming, and it's not licensed. And so she, was worried that she'd get sued, but it kind of uses Batman and it uses and she plays this kind of character who's sort of Harlequin and sort of the Joker and sort of neither of them. And yeah, it's just this kind of like personal queer coming out story, which kind of like uses, like, her best friend is the Penguin, who sort of is a stand-up comic, and they're in this kind of world where stand-up comedy is like tightly regulated by a guild. So like Lorne Michaels is sort of like who's the producer of Saturday Night Live, is sort of one of the bad guys. And it's just, it's kind of, it's really funny and weird, and I think is kind of, and is about in part how, queer people can find their own narratives in these stories or properties that aren't generally necessarily super friendly to queer people. The Marvel and Disney are both very nervous, especially now in the US, because there's a lot of vitriol being directed at queer people, and queer women especially. And so, it's kind of taking these properties which are not necessarily, super liberatory, or that don't necessarily, that may be funny, but aren't necessarily, funny in ways which are trying to be critique, and, take that for herself and do fun things with it that are meaningful to her, and that, recognize the way that you can kind of read Batman as a queer character, which is, something that people have done for decades, but which, the mainstream films don't necessarily pick up on. And and talk about the ways that, and also talking about the ways that, like, policing is not necessarily, because, superheroes are kind of police, and the People's Joker kind of like presents superheroes as people who are not necessarily, all that friendly to queer people and necessarily to like feminist liberation. So I think in a lot of these things, it's kind of less about the characters, because the characters could be anything, I mean, tons and tons of people have worked on those characters, and they do different things with them, which can be, I mean, Frank Miller has a famous variation on the Catwoman where she's a sex worker. And I mean, it's not, I wouldn't necessarily say it's strongly feminist, I mean, it's kind of fetishizes her and sort of presents her as this like strong woman character, but like in the interest of whom, it's like, it's not very female centered, I wouldn't say. So you can have something like that, or you can have something like the People's Joker, where it's this kind of loony, and where a lot of the humor is in sort of the way that you don't expect these characters to be doing these things or to be portrayed in this way. And that's, part of the fun of it and part of why it's funny. So I think the answer is, it depends. That's, yeah. So.
Thank you, sir. That's a wonderful answer. Now moving on to Dr. Rima. Icons like Meryl Streep often use sarcasm and wit to deliver powerful social critiques. How do you think women can use similar rhetorical strategies in public speaking to challenge stereotypes and provoke their thought?
Okay. I have not really watched much of Meryl Streep's, this kind of wit, sarcasm. Might be in giving an award in BAFTA or Golden Globe, might be that, she might have used certain such strategies. But yeah, as an individual, as an observer, as a student, as a learner, I definitely think certain rhetorical strategies in order for public speaking or to provoke thought. Some of them could be like, the personal narratives and storytelling. The personal narratives and storytelling, self-directed yet not deprecated, if used wisely, could actually provoke much more meaning and much more connection with the audience. And to borrow Aristotle's again, the rhetorical triad, ethos, that is the building credibility, where someone exercising authority on a subject. For example, listening to talks of Michelle Obama, I have found her lived experiences as a working mother, wife, a wife of president, advocating for health, education, in her book Becoming. So this her academic background helped establish a lot of credibility as well as challenge the stereotype of women being overtly political or overly emotional in politics or something. So what I'm trying to say is that ethos, so the person who is saying with her education, with her experience, with her lived experience, can make that difference. Another triad, the second one is pathos, what we understand as emotion. Even Dr. Piyush Rai mentioned of the same thing, using emotional language, tone, or delivery. I remember Oprah Winfrey's, while taking the award in the Golden Globe, she talked about her self, about her body being sexually abused, the injustice, and powerful stories where it empowered listeners to challenge gender equality or systemic issues in a much more personal way. So personal stories, narratives, ethos, pathos. I also believe inclusive language is one of the rhetoric strategies that could be used, rhetorical questions that could be used. And humor and wit, irony, they are always acting very, very interlaced with all of them. So that's my take on it.
Thank you, ma'am. My third question is to Dr. Piyush. Um, yes. In recent years, Indian women and stand up comedians have gained prominence, using humor to critique sexism and societal norms. How do you think Indian women comedians, through their humor, contribute to global conversation on feminism and social change, and how is this reflected in media?
Well, I think there is a larger question here. Indian comic actors will be heard at a global level. First, Indian actors have to be heard. Now, if you look at all the great lists of the great movies, compilations, we still stuck to every great listing has that maybe that one movie from Satyajit Ray's oeuvre. So we and even what is gaining traction or visibility today in the so-called the mainstream Bollywood that is being seen at the big festivals, you have our very famous actors and actresses quoting more headlines on the red carpet than for the content. I mean, I think all we imagine as light is a brilliant exception, and I see the beginning of a great moment from there. In our documentary space, year on year, our films are being showcased and being critically acclaimed at Cannes, at the Oscars, and other spaces. At least they're having the nomination. See, it's all about visibility. So, for the actor to be visible, first they have to visible in their own space, and then that own space, which is Indian cinema, has to be visible out there. And that's what. But I think the trends are changing with more and more. There has been a see now. Look at how Iranian cinema and Iranian filmmakers, and nearly 40 to 50% of the filmmakers from Iran who have made a mark abroad are women filmmakers. Now we need to have, but that so they become visible because Iranian cinema becomes visible. It's a logical thing. So we might have been doing great work here, but it is all limited to our space. Also because we are such a huge space, we don't want to many times from the box office point of view. It's a self-sustaining space. Lot smaller cinemas want that bigger visibility. I mean, that we have seen the phase of a Korean cinema being coming out there, then the Iranian cinema. Earlier, we had the cinema from Hong Kong and Taiwan. So we had that moment in our 80s when and there were years when Cannes would have films from In one particular year, you would have a Shyam Benikal, a Minal Sen, a Satyajit Ray, and a Adur Gopalakrishnan, and a Saji Karun all going there. And then they, along with them, then went the actors, and we had, I mean, Shabana Azmi has done a lot of international work. And in that space, I think like Om Puri has done. He's perhaps our greatest crossover actor, and East is East and West is West are brilliant, brilliant comedies. I mean, if you have to put that drama genre tag to them, so it is happening. But I think the more our cinema makes content which is global, has global traction, as the cinema gets visible, the directors get visible, the music makers get visible, the actors get visible, so everybody gets visibility and space. Like what happened with Rahman after Slumdog Millionaire.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for your answer. Now I will again come back to Noah, sir. Sir, can you turn on your camera?
Yep, sorry.
Okay. Your most famous book, in your book Wonder Woman, it highlighted that how Wonder Woman comics embrace queer identities and relationship in a way that was bold for their time. Do you see parallel between the use of queer humor in the comics and its role in the contemporary or modern activism for social change?
Um, well, I think that, yeah, I think humor has been part of a lot of queer art and queer activism to some extent, and that's, yeah, I think that's still the case. I mean, as I said, like, I mean, I think the People's Joker and the way it used camp is, similar to Wonder Woman in some ways. I mean, I think that part of what's both funny and kind of can be subversive about that is that, for Wonder Woman, it kind of, one of the things that the creators did initially, which, isn't necessarily always a thing, even in kind of later feminist versions of superheroes, is, Wonder Woman just seemed to be having a lot of fun. I mean, in the first Wonder Woman comic, kind of the first thing she does when she gets her magic lasso, which allows her to kind of like control people, is she lassos sort of the Amazon doctor and makes her stand on her head. That's kind of like the first thing she does. And so there's this sense, and she also, like, the other things Wonder Woman gets to do in the comics is like ride giant kangaroos and chase down automobiles. And I mean, it's just like a lot of fun, sort of like being an empowered character, which that isn't always sort of how it goes, right? Because like something like Buffy, it's all about how tormented and sad she is to sort of like have superpowers. So, but I think that kind of thing is also, I mean, there's a lot of sort of like humorous queer cinema this year in the US. Drive Away Dolls is this kind of comedy heist film with lesbian protagonists, and they're sort of like, I mean, basically the whole thing is about trying to recover these dildos, which it's great. It's really funny, and sort of like directly talks about Florida as repressive, and sort of presenting sort of like mocking that as kind of a way to try to empower people. So I think humor is kind of continues to be an important sort of like way that queer creators and feminist creators both kind of make fun of people who are oppressing them, and also just kind of like have fun and sort of demonstrate that like being a woman or being queer doesn't necessarily mean that you're miserable. It doesn't have to be like all some sort of tragic horror, that there's a lot of humor there. And I think that queer creators have always sort of found that, liberating and helpful. So.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. My next question is for Dr. Rima. Dr. Rima, sarcasm as a form of humor can vary significantly across cultural contexts. So, fun or sarcastic speeches often walk a fine line between entertaining the audience and conveying serious messages. How do you think Indian women in particular can use sarcastic humor effectively in speeches or media to address societal issue while maintaining cultural resonance?
Okay. Uh, Joyashree, let's be very honest in admitting that the east, west, north, south, or the center of the country is culturally stereotyped. And people with sense of wit and humor will actually acknowledge it more than resisting it. And majority of those stereotyping has happened over social media, films, popular culture, and the like, even through experiences. The idea is to nudge the problem or the attitude and not the people or the culture, as my opening lines had mentioned it, and that is where the neat boundaries are drawn. So, some issues are across cultures and relatable. Some issues are millennials related, some issues are Gen Zs related, some issues are from family ends, and the spectrum is pretty broad and vast. Yet there are common threads to it. But as I said, there is a fine line to tread without offending the sentiments. So I think our women stand-up comedians know their cards and their games really well. It depends upon the script they are writing, and I think they're doing their job well, and they know how to culturally resonate without offending the sentiments, really. And as I said as well, that even people are accepting or acknowledging, people with wit, that yeah, the stereotypicality exists. Let's admit it, and let's move on with it. So that would be my response. I pause here.
Thank you, ma'am. Really, Indian female comedians, stand-up comedians, doing a really great job. Okay. My next question to Dr. Piyush. Indian, okay, sir. Yeah. Indian cinema has often celebrated male comic heroes, but female comedians have played equally subservious roles. How do you think humor from iconic female characters has challenged patriarchal norms while engaging the audience?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. And all these great comic actors I talked about, starting with Tuntun. Uh, I mean, there is a song, I think, in one of those Gurudat movies, which is called All Line Clear, where there is Johnny Walker on one end and Tuntun in the other end. And she runs the family and runs the show. Oh, interestingly, if you look at the most of the films from the 50s, 60s, 70s, which when I was talking about Rajendranath Shashikala, Mehmood and Shobha Khote, Johnny Walker and Tuntun, in all their parallel stories, the female character had far more agency. They were dictating the terms. The men were more like buffoons around them. Whereas in the more hero heroine space, it was the hero calling the shots. So this is I think I mean, thank you for what your topic did. I went into this research and I thought this is a brilliant topic. Somebody should do a doctorate on this. I mean, we haven't gone into that space, and it is such an empowering. I mean, you look at in all these movies, like while the hero heroine have their own, the gendered equations are kind of generally skewed. Not so much in the romance, of course. Both the hero and heroine have a 50-50% stakeholding in the drama, but at the beginning of the angry young man phase, when it's all about the action, and then suddenly you have the women being coming in only to do a bit of the song and dance, and that element that starts with the well and begins in the 70s, goes on right till the 80s. Still, I think Hum Aapke Hain Kaun happens. That's like, I guess so. Of course, we had strong, meaty women roles and acts in the parallel cinema. I think one of the parallel cinema and middle of the road cinema balanced the women presence in a narrative which the commercial cinema didn't allow. That's one side of the story. But in the commercial cinema space, wherever these pairings were there, in the nok chonk that they had, in the song sequences that they had, in the way the amount of drama they were driving, in all these three major pairings of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was always the female comic actor who drove the narrative. So yeah, so they had I think then of course it blurs with everybody doing everything. So that's a different.
Thank you so much, sir. That's a very good observation and very good answer. So this brings us to the end of today's session. I thank all the panelists once again for sharing invaluable perspective on the topic and their valuable time as well. This was truly insightful.
Thank you, Joyashree.
Thank you.
Joyashree, thank you so much, and thanks to all my panelists and to Coral, yes, and to all the back-end support team.
And Dr. Rima, I think we
Project.
both are in the same city.
We are in the same city,
So we
Piyush,
should
sir.
connect.
We should
And
connect.
same Noah.
We should connect, and yes, definitely.
And great to hear
Yes.
from you, Noah. Very interesting insights.
Yes,
Yes.
thanks. Thank you.